Hello, everyone. Tonight, we're diving into a story that's bound to get you thinking. Imagine this a question, just a simple question, asked on Thanksgiving, leading to the unraveling of everything you thought you knew about your life. The kind of question that shakes the foundation of everything you believe to be true. You might not survive the shock of it. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It's always fascinating to see how far my story can reach. Now, let's settle in. Turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's begin our journey tonight. I never expected that a simple question on Thanksgiving would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. For the past 2 years, I'd been struggling to make ends meet on my janitor's salary, rationing my blood pressure medication, and wearing the same worn coat through 2 harsh winters. But I told myself it was temporary, that things would get better. My son Daniel had built an empire from nothing. At 35, he owned a successful tech consulting firm that employed over 200 people. I was proud of him, even though our conversations had become brief phone calls about business meetings and client dinners. After his father passed away 3 years ago, Daniel threw himself into his work, and I understood. Grief affects everyone differently. The house felt different that Thanksgiving morning. I'd spent hours preparing his favorite dishes, even though the grocery bill meant skipping lunch for the next week. My small kitchen barely contained all the pots and pans, but I wanted everything perfect for his visit. It had been 4 months since I'd seen him in person. When Daniel walked through my front door, I was struck by how expensive everything looked. His watch, his shoes, even his casual sweater probably cost more than my monthly rent. Behind him walked his wife, Olivia, who had been his partner for 3 years. She wore a cream-colored coat that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the November wind. "Mom, the house smells incredible," Daniel said, hugging me briefly before stepping back to help Olivia with her coat. She smiled at me, that polished smile she always wore, but her eyes seemed to be calculating something. We sat down to dinner, and I listened as Daniel talked about expanding his business to the West Coast. Olivia chimed in, occasionally mentioning their recent trip to Europe and the renovations they were planning for their home. I nodded and smiled, even though each detail reminded me of the growing distance between my life and theirs. Then, as I was serving the pumpkin pie, Daniel leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Mom, I've been meaning to ask you something that's been on my mind." I set the pie server down, giving him my full attention. "How are you enjoying the lake house I gave you 2 years ago? I know you've always loved being near the water." The words hit me like ice water. I stared at him, my mouth slightly open, trying to process what he just said. "What lake house?" I replied, feeling my heartbeat quicken. "I never received anything like that." Daniel's smile faltered. He glanced at Olivia, who had gone very still beside him. "The house on Lake Morrison. I had it transferred to your name for your birthday 2 years ago. Don't you remember?" I shook my head slowly, feeling dizzy. "Daniel, I would remember receiving a house. I've never gotten anything like that. Are you sure you're not thinking of someone else?" Olivia suddenly stood up, her napkin falling to the floor. "Oh, I just remembered," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual. "I need to make a phone call about tomorrow's appointment. Excuse me." She walked quickly toward the kitchen, pulling out her phone, but something about her movement felt wrong, urgent in a way that made my stomach clench. Daniel was frowning now, his businessman's mind clearly trying to solve a puzzle. "Mom, that's impossible. I specifically had my assistant handle all the paperwork. The deed should have been mailed to you, and there were supposed to be monthly maintenance payments set up too." Monthly payments? I felt my legs weaken.
On $500 a month for 2 years, that's $36,000, Daniel. Enough to have changed everything for me. Enough to buy the medications I needed to fix my car, to not worry about every grocery purchase.
I gripped the edge of the table, my heart racing as I tried to process this new revelation. David, I swear to you, I haven't received any monthly payments. I've been struggling to pay for my blood pressure medication. Last month, I had to choose between groceries and my electric bill. His face went white. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's impossible. I have receipts, bank transfers. Everything should be documented. From the kitchen, I could hear Olivia's voice, low and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. My hands started trembling as the full weight of the situation began to settle over me. "Show me," I whispered. "Show me the paperwork." Daniel was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through emails with increasing desperation. "I have copies of everything at home. The deed transfer, the payment confirmations. Mom, if you haven't been getting this money, then where has it been going?"
We both turned toward the kitchen at the same moment. Olivia's voice had stopped. The silence felt heavy, guilty. I stood up on unsteady legs and walked toward the kitchen doorway.
Olivia was standing with her back to us, phone pressed to her ear, but she wasn't talking anymore. When she heard our footsteps, she spun around, her face flushed.
"Everything okay?"
Daniel asked, but his tone had changed. It was the voice he used in business meetings when he suspected someone wasn't being truthful. Olivia's smile looked strained. "Of course, just confirming our dinner plans for tomorrow." But I could see it now. The guilt written across her features, the way she couldn't quite meet my eyes. The nervous way she was fidgeting with her wedding ring. Daniel asked slowly, "Olivia, do you know anything about the lake house paperwork? You helped coordinate with my assistant on several things around that time."
The silence that followed felt endless. Olivia's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. In that moment, looking at her face, I knew somehow, some way, she had taken what was meant for me.
The Thanksgiving I'd worked so hard to make perfect was about to become the day my family fell apart. The silence in my small dining room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Olivia stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, her perfectly manicured hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Daniel was staring at his wife with an expression I'd never seen before, confusion mixed with growing suspicion. "Olivia," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, "where is my lake house?" She swallowed hard, her eyes darting between Daniel and me. I think there's been some misunderstanding. Maybe the paperwork got lost in the mail. Or perhaps there was an error at the bank." But even as she spoke, I could see the lie forming in her eyes. After working as a janitor for 15 years, cleaning offices late at night, I'd learned to read people. You see a lot when you're invisible to most folks, when they talk around you like you're not there. Olivia was lying and she wasn't very good at it. Daniel pulled out his phone again. "I'm calling Rebecca, my assistant. She handled all of this personally." "No, wait," Olivia said quickly, stepping forward. "Maybe we should discuss this privately first. Your mother has been through a lot, and I don't want to upset her more if this is just a simple mix-up." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. "Upset me more?" I asked, my voice calm but steady. "I've been living on crackers and peanut butter for dinner most nights while you wore designer clothes and took European vacations." But I kept my voice calm. "Olivia, honey, I think we're past worrying about upsetting me. I need to know where my house is." Daniel, clearly desperate to get to the bottom of this, had already dialed the number. Within seconds, I heard a woman's voice on the other end. "Rebecca, it's Daniel," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I need you to pull up the paperwork for the lake house I purchased for my mother 2 years ago." There was a pause. Then Rebecca's voice came through more clearly as Daniel put the phone on speaker. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. The property at 1247 Lake Morrison Drive. The deed was transferred to Margaret Harrison on November 15th, 2 years ago. I have copies of all the signed documents." My heart pounded. That was my name, my address for the paperwork, but I had never signed anything. "And the monthly payments?" Daniel asked, trying to hold it together. "Where did they go?" "All processed as requested," Rebecca continued. "The $1,500 a month transferred on the first of every month to the account you specified. Account holder Margaret Harrison. Routing number ending in 4782. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I don't have an account ending in 4782, I said softly. "My account ends in 9156. Daniel's eyes snapped to Olivia. "Rebecca, can you read me the full account number?" he asked. As Rebecca rattled off the numbers, I watched Olivia's face crumble. It wasn't my account. It wasn't even close. "Rebecca, who provided you with this account information?" Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet now. "Your wife, sir?" Rebecca said, her voice uncomfortably clear. "Mrs. Harrison called me in December 2 years ago and said there had been a change in your mother's banking information. She provided the new routing and account numbers and asked me to update all the records." The phone slipped slightly in Daniel's hand, and Olivia made a small, desperate sound in the back of her throat. "And the deed?" Daniel continued, his voice firm but shaking. "Where was it supposed to be mailed to?" "The address Mrs. Harrison provided," Rebecca replied. 847 Maple Street, apartment 2B. I froze. "I've never lived on Maple Street," I whispered. "I've been in the same small house for 10 years. Daniel hung up the phone, and the silence that followed was deafening. When he looked at Olivia, his face was completely blank, which somehow seemed more terrifying than anger would have been. "Explain," he said simply. Olivia's composure finally shattered. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but they looked more like panic than remorse.
"David, you have to understand," she said, sobbing now. "My parents were about to lose their house. They're elderly, and my father's medical bills were bankrupting them. I just borrowed the money temporarily."
"Borrowed?" I whispered, my voice thick with disbelief. "You mean stole?" "No," Olivia cried out. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed time and the lake house. It's not like you were using it. My family needed a place to stay while they got back on their feet." The callousness of her words hit me like a physical blow. "Fine, healthy," I muttered. I thought about the nights I'd lay awake, chest tight with stress, wondering how I'd pay for my next prescription. The times I'd stood in the grocery store, calculator in hand, putting items back because I couldn't afford them. "Where is my house now?" I asked again, my voice barely above a whisper. Olivia wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her designer makeup smearing. "My parents are living there, and my brother's family. They've been renovating it, making improvements with my money," she admitted miserably. Daniel looked at me, a mixture of guilt and helplessness in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought you were okay. I thought you had everything you needed." I looked at my son, this successful man who'd worked so hard to build a better life, and I saw the little boy who used to promise he'd take care of me when he grew up. He'd tried to keep that promise, but the woman he trusted most in the world had stolen it from both of us. "How much?" I asked Olivia quietly. "How much of my money did you take?" She was quiet for a long moment, unable to meet my gaze. Finally, she whispered, "All of it. $36,000 plus a house that's probably worth at least $200,000 more." Victoria's family had been living like kings on money that was meant to keep me from poverty. Daniel stood up slowly, his movements careful and controlled. "Olivia, pack your things. I want you out of my house tonight." "David, please," she begged, reaching for him. "We can fix this. I'll make it right. I'll find a way to pay your mother back." He stepped away from her touch, his jaw clenched. "With what money, Olivia? You haven't worked a day since we got married. Everything you have, everything your family has been living on was stolen from my mother." I watched Olivia fall apart, and I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a hollow emptiness where trust used to be. She'd looked me in the eye for 2 years, sat at this very table, knowing I was struggling while her family lived in luxury at my expense. As Victoria's sobs echoed through my small dining room, I realized that this Thanksgiving would indeed be unforgettable, but not because of the family gathering I'd hoped for. It would be remembered as the day I learned that sometimes the people who smile the brightest are the ones hiding the darkest secrets. The house felt different after Olivia left. Quieter, but not peaceful. It was like a heavy cloud lingered in the air, pressing down on everything. I didn't know what to do with myself. Part of me wanted to call a friend, but who could I call? The people I used to confide in, the ones I had trusted, had all faded away over the years. It was just me left alone in a life I hadn't chosen for myself. My thoughts kept racing back to the conversation with Daniel. It was all so surreal. 1 minute everything felt fine, like nothing had changed. And the next, I discovered the very foundation of my life had been stolen from under me. The money, the house, my identity. I walked slowly back to the living room, my mind still reeling. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the stillness. I sat down in the worn armchair where I had spent countless nights over the years, reflecting on the choices that led me here. The chair felt like an old friend, its creaky frame offering the comfort that nothing else in this house seemed to provide anymore. The reality was sinking in. My son, my only child, had been deceived, manipulated by the very woman he had chosen to spend his life with. And now she had taken so much from me. It wasn't just the money or the lake house, it was the betrayal, the theft of trust, of security, and of dignity. I had been made to feel invisible for years, struggling to survive in the background of my son's perfect, polished life. Meanwhile, Olivia had been living in luxury, treating herself and her family to the things that should have been mine: the house, the monthly payments, everything. And what did I get? A life spent rationing medication, choosing between groceries and the electricity bill. I knew I should be angry. I should be furious at what Olivia had done, at how she had used her charm to manipulate her way into my life and systematically take from me. But as I sat in that chair, the anger seemed distant. Instead, I was filled with something far more dangerous: disappointment. Disappointment in myself for trusting her, for believing her lies. Disappointment in Daniel for not seeing the truth sooner. He had been busy, yes, but he also hadn't been looking for the truth. It was too easy to believe that everything was fine, too easy to think that Olivia, with her polished smile and carefully crafted image, was a good person. I sighed deeply and stared out the window. The autumn leaves outside had already started to fall, leaving bare branches that reminded me of the emptiness I felt inside. I wondered if it was possible to rebuild something after it had been so completely destroyed. I had spent so many years trying to make everything work, trying to hold my family together, that I hadn't stopped to think about what was being taken from me in the process. Maybe, just maybe, I had given up too much. That's when my phone rang. I glanced down at the screen and saw Daniel's name flashing. I almost didn't answer, but I had to. I couldn't avoid him forever. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "Are you okay?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the question. "I'm surviving," I replied softly. "How about you?" I'm trying to process all of this," he said after a long pause. "It doesn't make sense. I don't know how Olivia could do this. It's like she was living 2 lives, one with me and one with her family, and I never saw it." "I didn't see it either," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I trusted her, Daniel. I thought she cared about me. I thought we were family." "We are family, Mom," Daniel said, his tone firm. "I'm sorry.
I don't know how I let this go on for so long. I trusted her because I thought she was doing what was best for all of us.
I could hear the guilt in his voice, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort him. Not yet. He had been deceived just like I had. His entire world had been turned upside down by a woman who had taken everything from both of us.
Listen, he said, his voice softening. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. I don't care what it takes, Mom. I'll fix this.
I didn't respond right away. What was there to say? He was trying to fix things, but I didn't know if anything could ever feel right again. The truth had been exposed, but it felt like nothing had changed. My life was still in pieces, and no amount of money or promises could change the fact that I had been left in the dark for so long. Okay, Daniel, I said finally. We'll figure it out, but you need to know I'm not going to let this go. I'm not going to sit quietly while my life was stolen. I know, Mom, he said. I know. I could hear him take a deep breath on the other end. I've been working with a lawyer to get everything in order. We'll start the legal process and we'll get this fixed. But it's going to take time. Time, I repeated. Time is something I haven't had a lot of, Daniel. But I'm done waiting. I need my life back.
Mom, we'll get it back, Daniel said. Just trust me. This isn't over. We'll fix everything, I promise.
The promise hung in the air like a fragile thread. I wasn't sure if I believed it yet, but for the first time in days, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to regain control of my life. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair trying to breathe through the heaviness of it all. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from my lawyer. The message read, "We have enough evidence to press charges. Let me know how you want to proceed."
The weight of it all hit me again. I had been silent for so long, letting things slip by as my life crumbled around me. But now, I had a choice. A choice to take back what was mine, to fight for the dignity I had lost. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick, but it would be mine.
And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone steal my future. The next few days were a blur. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as I tried to piece together the life that had been torn apart. My phone constantly buzzed with calls and messages, but none of them brought me the comfort I needed. Most were from Daniel asking how I was doing, reassuring me that things would be sorted soon. But no amount of reassurances could take away the sense of betrayal that gnawed at me.
The lake house. The money, the documents, it all swirled in my head like a storm. I had been living a lie, and now the truth had torn through everything. But amidst the chaos, something inside me began to shift. I wasn't just going to let this be a painful chapter in my life. No, I was going to take back what was mine.
I had lived in this town for so long where everyone knew everyone else's business. And this entire ordeal had become fodder for whispers and gossip. The headlines of the local paper had made it clear Olivia Stevens arrested for fraud and identity theft. I couldn't even bring myself to read the full article. I didn't need to. I already knew the story. But what I hadn't expected was how people would react. When I walked into the grocery store the day after everything had broken, the cashier greeted me with a forced smile. "Hey, Mrs. Harrison, I saw you on the news," she said, her voice too bright. "I'm so sorry what you're going through. I can't imagine."
I simply nodded, trying to hide the discomfort that bubbled inside me. They all knew. The people I had lived next to for years, the ones who waved at me from across the street or asked me how my day was. They all knew what Olivia had done, and I was left to carry the weight of it. As I walked down the aisles, pushing my cart with shaking hands, I could feel their eyes on me even though no one dared to approach. The sympathy was almost worse than the anger I had expected. They felt sorry for me, but I didn't need their pity. I had had enough of that. By the time I returned home, it was almost dusk. The house felt cold, empty, and uninviting.
Even though it was technically mine now, it felt strange. Like a stranger's house I was visiting, rather than the place I had once called my home. Everything about it seemed to remind me of what had been stolen from me, the lake view, the space, the peace of mind that I had been denied. I made my way to the kitchen and began preparing a simple meal. It was quiet, too quiet, but the rhythm of cooking grounded me. Each chop of the knife, the simmer of the sauce, it brought a moment of clarity in the chaos. I had been a janitor for years. I had worked for everything I had, no matter how little. But in the blink of an eye, everything could be taken away. The house, the money, the security. They were supposed to be my safety net. But instead, they had become the very instruments of my undoing. Olivia had used my trust, my need for help, to manipulate me into losing everything. It wasn't just the financial loss. It wasn't just the lake house. It was the years I had lost, years that could never be reclaimed. Years spent being invisible in my son's life. Years spent watching the world pass me by while Olivia and her family lived in comfort at my expense. The house was no longer a place of comfort. It felt more like a monument to my own failure. As I sat down at the dining table, I couldn't help but think about the future. What would it look like now? Would I ever feel secure again? A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. I didn't expect anyone, but when I opened it, I was surprised to find David standing there holding a stack of papers. He had changed out of his suit, and though he looked exhausted, his face held a determination I hadn't seen before. "Mom," he said quietly, stepping inside when I opened the door. "I wanted to go over everything with you. We've been making progress with the lawyers, but we need to move quickly. This is the first of many steps." I nodded and let him in my heart, heavy with the knowledge that everything had to change now. But as I sat down at the table with him, the weight of the situation started to feel a little less overwhelming. Maybe it was because I had my son with me, the one person who could help me make sense of everything. "Let's go over it," I said, though my voice felt raw. "Tell me everything you've uncovered." David handed me the first set of papers. It was a stack of legal documents, bank records, and receipts. As I flipped through them, I saw the numbers, the amounts of money, the dates, when the fraudulent transactions had taken place. Every figure was a reminder of what I had lost. The documents were clear. Olivia had stolen more than just money. She had taken my peace of mind, my stability. She had used my name, my identity, my life to build a lie. And now that lie was collapsing. "I've been thinking about how this all happened," David said as he sat across from me. "Olivia was the one who suggested I send you the money. She made it seem like it was the right thing to do. She said it would be good for you for your health, but I never thought to check. You trusted her." I said the words, feeling heavier than I had expected. "You trusted her because you thought she was taking care of me. But she wasn't. She was taking care of herself, using you to steal from both of us." David nodded, the guilt in his eyes evident. "I should have known. I should have done more. I've spent so much of the last few days just thinking about how I let this go on for so long." "We can't change the past," I said, though the bitterness in my tone was hard to hide. "But we can make sure this never happens again, to me or anyone else." David's face softened. "We will, Mom. I promise you that." I looked at the papers, the reality of the situation setting in. Olivia had used everything, every vulnerability, every moment of trust to manipulate both of us. And now I had to reclaim what was rightfully mine. But as I looked up at David, I saw something else. A glimmer of hope. We weren't helpless. We could take back control. Together, we would fix this. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt like there might be a way out of this. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be quick. But it would be justice. The weeks that followed were filled with frustration, paperwork, and endless phone calls.
It was a whirlwind of legal battles and investigative reports, each one revealing just how deep Olivia's betrayal had run. The more I uncovered, the harder it was to believe that the woman I had once welcomed into my family was capable of something so monstrous. Yet here we were, fighting to undo the damage she had done. David and I spent hours at his lawyer's office, reviewing documents, making plans, and gathering evidence. The weight of it all felt suffocating at times, but every time I looked at my son, the fire in his eyes, the determination to fix this, I felt a little more hope stirring inside me. The first major breakthrough came when the bank released the records. The account that Olivia had set up in my name was more than just a fraudulent deposit of the money David had sent. There were other transactions, loans, credit cards, and even an untraceable withdrawal that we couldn't yet explain. David's lawyer told us it was likely that Olivia had been running a scheme with someone else. She couldn't have done this all on her own. She was too careful, too methodical, David said as we reviewed the details one night. She knew what she was doing. This wasn't just a mistake. She planned this. It was hard to swallow. Olivia hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen my life. But there was no time to dwell on that now. I had to focus on what was in front of me, reclaiming my identity, my finances, and the future I had worked so hard to build. The first step in that process was going to be the lake house. Technically, it was still in my name, but it had been illegally occupied by Olivia's family, and I wasn't sure what kind of mess we'd be dealing with when we went there. David had hired a forensic accountant to trace all the financial transactions, and once that was done, we'd have a much clearer picture of the damage she had caused. A few days after our meeting with the lawyer, we drove to the lake house. I was filled with a mix of emotions as we approached the property. It was beautiful, just as David had intended for me. A sprawling ranch-style home overlooking the water, surrounded by tall trees and well-maintained gardens. But now, as I stood at the threshold, the reality of the situation hit me. Olivia's family had been living here for 2 years, using my stolen money to renovate and improve the property. I was walking into a space that should have been my refuge, but instead, it was a painful reminder of everything I had lost. David opened the door and led the way inside. The house was quiet, eerily so. It felt like no one had lived here, like everything had been frozen in time. The furniture was still in place, but it felt out of place now. This wasn't my home. It was a monument to Olivia's theft. I walked through the rooms, taking in every detail. The fresh paint on the walls, the new carpets, the updated kitchen. It all looked so nice, so perfect, but it was all built on lies. David was right behind me, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know this isn't how you envisioned it, but we'll make it right. We'll get everything back, the money, the property, and we'll make sure Olivia pays for what she's done." I nodded, my heart heavy. I never asked for this. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to be taken care of, to have a little peace in my life. But Olivia, she didn't just take money. She took my trust. She took my dignity. David reached out, putting a hand on my shoulder. "And you're going to get it all back, I promise." It was hard to believe him in that moment. The house was still too new, too perfect. But as I stood there, feeling the weight of everything Olivia had stolen from me, I realized something. This was mine now. It was a painful victory, but it was mine. Over the next few days, we continued to work with the lawyer and the forensic accountant. The full extent of Olivia's crimes was starting to unfold, and with each new discovery, the picture became clearer. Not only had she been stealing from me for 2 years, but she had also been running a side scheme to finance her family's lavish lifestyle. It was staggering. David's lawyer had advised us to move forward with filing criminal charges, and we agreed. Olivia needed to face the consequences of her actions. She couldn't be allowed to get away with what she had done, not to me, not to David,
and not to anyone else she had deceived. But even as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, I couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold. The lake house was now mine legally, but it would take time to make it feel like home. The renovations and updates would need to be reversed. The money that had been stolen from me, over $78,000, would have to be recovered. But I couldn't help but think about all the years I had spent scraping by, living paycheck to paycheck while Olivia's family lived in luxury. David, for his part, had been doing everything in his power to make things right. He had apologized 1,000 times, but it never seemed like enough. He had been manipulated just like I had. But in the end, he was the one who was going to help me rebuild my life. The hardest part was dealing with the reality of it all. As I stood in the house that had once been my dream, I realized that I had to let go of the anger. Olivia had stolen from me, but I couldn't let her take my future too. I had to fight for it, not just for myself, but for the life I deserved. As we finished our work at the lake house and headed back to my small home, I felt a strange sense of resolve. It wasn't over yet. There was still much to be done. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own destiny. David had been by my side through it all, and I knew that we would rebuild together. We would get through this, and we would come out stronger on the other side. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never let anyone take my power again. The following weeks felt like a blur of phone calls, meetings, and visits to the lawyer's office. With each step, the weight of Olivia's betrayal seemed to lift ever so slightly, but the journey was far from over. It felt like we were moving through a fog, unsure of where we were headed, but determined to get to the other side. The police had been notified about Olivia's fraudulent activities, and the investigation was ongoing. It was a slow process, as investigations tend to be. But with each new piece of evidence, the picture of her deceit became more and more complete. Every time I thought I had absorbed the full extent of the betrayal, something new would come to light, like the discovery of another fraudulent credit card in my name, or a loan taken out using my personal details. But the hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It wasn't even the emotional toll it was taking on me. The hardest part was seeing how the situation had affected David. He had always been a strong, independent man, but I could see the cracks in his armor. He was heartbroken. Not just because of what Olivia had done to me, but because of the guilt he felt for not seeing it sooner. I could tell that he was beating himself up over not noticing the signs. "Mom," he said one evening as we sat in the living room sipping on tea after another exhausting day of meetings. "I just keep thinking about how I should have paid more attention. If I had, maybe we could have stopped this before it got so bad." I looked at him. The man I had raised, the man who had built an empire from the ground up, and I saw the pain in his eyes. I reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "David, you can't blame yourself. You've done everything you could. No one knew what Olivia was capable of. She was good at hiding it. But I should have been there more for you," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have noticed that you were struggling. I should have checked on you more." I shook my head. "You've been busy building your future, building your company. I've always been proud of you, and I knew you were doing what you had to do. You don't need to feel guilty about that. But what happened with Olivia, that was on her, not you." David didn't say anything for a moment, his eyes focused on his hands. Finally, he looked up and met my gaze. "I just want to make this right, Mom. I want to fix everything for both of us." His words warmed my heart, but I knew that no amount of fixing could undo what had already been done. Still, I appreciated his determination, and I understood the deep need he felt to protect me, to make up for the time he felt he'd lost. "You will, David," I said softly. "We'll fix this together, and we'll get our lives back." We both fell silent, lost in thought, the weight of everything still hanging heavy between us. As the days passed, I noticed that David was visiting more often, checking in with me almost every day. His presence became a comforting constant in my life. I knew he was trying to make up for lost time, and I appreciated it more than I could put into words. But as much as I valued our newfound closeness, there were still moments of tension. There were still times when I caught him looking at me with an expression that told me he was second-guessing his every move, wondering if he was doing enough, wondering if he could ever truly make it right. One afternoon, as I was sitting by the window, watching the sunset over the lake, David came to visit. He had a new energy about him, one that was different from the guilt-ridden man I had seen in the past few weeks. He had a plan. "I've been thinking," he said, sitting beside me. "Once everything's settled with Olivia, I want to help you with something more than just financial security. I want to help you rebuild in every way possible. You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. Now it's time for you to do something for yourself." His words caught me off guard, and I looked at him, my heart swelling with gratitude. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, I want to help you live the life you deserve," David said, his voice full of determination. "Not just surviving, but truly living. You've worked so hard, and you've sacrificed so much. I want to make sure you never have to worry about anything again." Tears sprang to my eyes as I absorbed his words. It wasn't about the money or the lake house. It was about the thought, the love, and the genuine care he was offering. "You've already done so much for me, David," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't need anything more than what you've already given me." But David wasn't done. He reached into his bag and pulled out a brochure. "I've already started looking into retirement communities," he said. "Not for now, but when you're ready. Somewhere you can live without the worries of maintaining a house or dealing with all the responsibilities. You deserve peace and comfort." I looked at the brochure in his hands, and my heart skipped a beat. The idea of not having to worry about anything, of finally having a place to call my own without the constant pressure of bills and responsibilities, was almost too much to take in. But I knew that it was something I couldn't just brush off. It was a new beginning, a new chapter, and I felt the weight of the years I had spent struggling start to lift. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, overcome with emotion. This is more than I could ever ask for." David smiled, a real smile this time, one that didn't carry the weight of guilt. "You don't have to say anything. Just think about it, and when you're ready, we'll make it happen." I nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I could see a future that wasn't defined by the struggles I had endured, but by the choices I would make moving forward. We spent the rest of the afternoon together, talking about the future, about the things I could do now that I hadn't been able to do before. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly hopeful. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the lake in soft golden light, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a victory over Olivia's crimes. This was a chance to rebuild not just my finances, but my life. And I was ready for it. The next few weeks felt like a strange mixture of clarity and chaos. Olivia's trial was nearing, and the reality of what she had done to me, to our family, was beginning to settle in. David had made great strides in helping me process everything, but I could feel the weight of the betrayal every time I closed my eyes. It was as though her deception had embedded itself deep in my soul. The anger was still there, but it was transforming into something different, something more empowering. David had become an even more regular fixture in my life. He showed up nearly every day, sometimes with pastries, sometimes just to sit with me in silence. It was clear that he was trying to make up for the time he'd lost, but it felt like so much more than that. He was making a concerted effort to show me that I wasn't just his mother. I was a person, someone worthy of love and respect. This was new for us, this bond, and it felt like the beginning of something beautiful. And then one evening, David sat me down at the kitchen table with a serious look on his face, as if he had something he needed to tell me. I braced myself for whatever news was coming, still unsure whether it would be good or bad. "Mom, I've been thinking," he began, running his hands over his forehead. "You know how I've been handling all the legal stuff with Olivia's case, but I think it's time we start focusing on the future. You deserve to live the life you've worked so hard for." I nodded slowly, still unsure what exactly he was getting at. "What do you mean?" "I know you've been thinking about the lake house, and honestly, it's yours now legally and in every other way," he continued, his tone determined. "But I want to help you make it more than just a house. I want to help you create a space that's truly yours, a place where you can finally relax, be yourself, and not feel the weight of what happened hanging over you." I was taken aback. I had thought about the lake house as a place to escape a retreat from everything that had happened. But David was talking about making it a home, something more than a symbol of the pain Olivia had caused me. "David, I don't know what to say," I said, my voice shaky with emotion. I never thought I would get to a point where I'd be able to enjoy a place like that. It's always felt like a dream, and I don't even know if I'm ready to turn it into something more. David smiled softly, reassuringly. "You are. I can see it in your eyes. You've been through so much, but you're not just surviving anymore, Mom. You're healing. And healing is a process not just for you, but for both of us. I've been so focused on fixing things with Olivia that I didn't realize what I had with you was more important than I could have ever imagined." Tears sprang to my eyes as I looked at my son, the man who had been so absorbed in his career, in his success, that he had failed to see the hurt I had been hiding. But here he was offering me something I had never expected: peace, security, and the promise of a future that I could finally call my own. "Thank you, David," I whispered, feeling the weight of the words in my chest. "I don't know if I can ever truly repay you for all you've done, but I'm so grateful." He reached out and gently squeezed my hand. "You don't have to repay me, Mom. I've learned so much about love, trust, and forgiveness through all this. And now I want to make sure you have everything you need." The conversation shifted after that naturally to what would come next. We discussed renovations for the lake house, ways to personalize it so that it felt like my space, my sanctuary, rather than just a place where I had been handed what was stolen from me. David was enthusiastic, talking about ideas for the garden painting, the walls in a color that would evoke peace and tranquility, something I could enjoy without the reminder of Olivia's deceit. Over the next few weeks, David worked tirelessly with contractors, interior designers, and landscapers to transform the lake house. Every choice was made with my happiness in mind, and it felt good to be a part of the process. Slowly, the house started to reflect my personality, soft, warm tones, and calming spaces. The once stark, empty rooms began to fill with memories, with pieces of my past and plans for the future. The hardest part of all this, however, was the emotional healing that needed to take place. The trauma of Olivia's betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it was fading. It wasn't easy, but each day I felt a little bit stronger. I had a good support system in place now. David's presence in my life was consistent and full of love, and slowly I learned to trust again. Not just in him, but in myself. I had been through something horrific, but I had survived. And that survival meant something worth fighting for. But as much as David was doing for me, there were moments when I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He had sacrificed so much for me already, and I couldn't help but wonder if I was taking too much. The weight of his love was heavy sometimes, but I knew he didn't see it as a burden. He just wanted to give me the life I deserved, and for that,
I was eternally grateful.
One morning, as I stood in the kitchen of the lake house, sipping my coffee, I realized something. My life had been forever changed by Olivia's theft. But what I had lost, I had also gained back in a different form. I wasn't the woman I had been before all of this, the woman who worked tirelessly just to survive. Now I had the chance to truly live.
David came by that afternoon, as he often did, and found me sitting on the porch watching the lake shimmer in the late afternoon sun. He smiled when he saw me, as if he could sense the peace that was finally beginning to settle within me. "I think we're getting there, Mom," he said, sitting beside me. "I think so too," I replied, the words full of meaning. "We're getting there." And for the first time in a long time, I felt that everything would be okay. Not because the past had been erased, but because I had finally found a way to move forward. The future was mine again, and I was ready to embrace it. As the months passed, I found myself settling into a rhythm that had been absent from my life for far too long. The lake house, now fully renovated, became more than just a house. It became a home, a place where I could breathe, where the weight of Olivia's betrayal no longer loomed over me. Every morning I woke up to the sound of the water gently lapping at the shore, a constant reminder that life, like the lake, had its ebbs and flows. The peace I had longed for was finally within my reach, and it was all thanks to David. Though I had spent most of my adult life working tirelessly, often sacrificing my health and my happiness for the sake of making ends meet, it was hard to let go of those habits. I felt guilty for enjoying the comfort of the lake house, for allowing myself to be pampered in ways I had never imagined. But every time I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, I realized that I had earned this. I had worked hard for so many years, and now it was time to let myself enjoy the fruits of that labor. David, too, seemed to be finding a new sense of balance in his life. He had learned to take breaks from his business, to check in with me regularly, and to prioritize his own well-being. The guilt that had initially consumed him seemed to fade as he began to realize that he was doing the right thing, that he was healing as much as I was. Our relationship, which had once been defined by brief phone calls and the occasional dinner, had blossomed into something real, something built on honesty, trust, and shared experience. One evening, as we sat on the porch after dinner, David turned to me, his face thoughtful. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said. "You've been through so much, and I don't think I've truly thanked you for everything you did for me growing up. All the sacrifices you made, the hard work you put in." "David," I interrupted, smiling softly, "I never did it for thanks. You know that." He shook his head. "But you should have been thanked. I've been so focused on my career that I didn't even realize how much you were sacrificing just to make sure I had what I needed. You've given me so much, and now it's my turn to give back to you." I could feel the sincerity in his words, and for the first time I realized how much he had grown, how much he had changed. "You've already given me more than I could have ever hoped for, David. Your love, your attention, and this life we're building together, that's more than I could ever ask for." He smiled, his eyes warm. "But there's still so much more we can do together. I want to make sure you live your best life, Mom. I'm not just talking about the lake house or the money. I'm talking about spending time with you, making memories that we'll both cherish for the rest of our lives." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years feeling invisible, working behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly for everyone else. But now David was giving me the one thing I had always wanted: time. Time with him, time to relax, time to enjoy the life we had left to live. Over the next few weeks, we began taking small trips together, weekend getaways to nearby towns, hikes in the mountains, visits to local museums. It wasn't about luxury or grand gestures. It was about the simple joy of being together,
of sharing experiences that would become part of our story. Each trip, each moment spent with David made the pain of the past seem more distant, more irrelevant. One morning after we returned from a trip to a nearby vineyard, David and I were sitting on the porch sipping wine and watching the sun set over the lake. He looked at me, his eyes soft with affection. "I'm really glad we're doing this, Mom. I'm glad we're taking the time to rebuild our relationship. It feels like we finally found the balance we needed." I nodded, my heart full. It does feel right, doesn't it? Like we're both finally where we need to be. David smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "I was thinking maybe we should throw a party. Celebrate all this progress we've made, both of us. A celebration of everything we've come through and everything we've built together." I raised an eyebrow. "A party?" "Yeah," he said, chuckling. "We could invite a few close friends, family. Nothing fancy, just a gathering to mark this new chapter in our lives." I thought about it for a moment. It was a nice idea, but it wasn't really my style. I had always preferred quiet moments over grand celebrations. But I saw the excitement in David's eyes, and for him, I knew this meant something. "All right, David, we'll have a party. Just promise me one thing."
"What's that?"
"That we'll keep it simple," I said, with a wink. "No fancy speeches, no over-the-top decorations, just us, our friends, and a good time."
He laughed and nodded. "Deal. Simple it is." As we spent the next few weeks preparing for the party, I couldn't help but reflect on how far I had come. I had started out as a woman who was barely scraping by, unsure of how she would make it through each day. But now I had a home, a son who loved me, and a future that felt full of possibility. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living. On the day of the party, the lake house was filled with laughter and music. Friends and family gathered, and as I watched them mingle and enjoy themselves, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just a party, it was a celebration of everything I had survived, everything I had rebuilt, and everything that lay ahead. David was right. We had come a long way. And I was finally ready to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that no matter what happened, I was strong enough to face it. The days following the party felt like a blur of new beginnings and quiet victories. It wasn't just the celebration itself that had changed me, but the realization that I had everything I needed now: freedom, peace, and a deep connection with my son that I hadn't realized I'd been missing for so long. The lake house, once a symbol of betrayal, had transformed into a sanctuary where I could finally breathe deeply without the weight of worry constantly on my shoulders. As the weeks passed, I found myself doing things I hadn't been able to enjoy for years. I took long walks through the wooded trails near the house, allowing myself the luxury of slow, deliberate steps. I spent hours gardening, planting flowers that brightened the space, making it feel like it truly belonged to me. It wasn't just about fixing the house or putting everything in its place. It was about reclaiming my life, my independence, and my peace of mind. David continued to visit regularly, each time seeming more at ease, more present. Our relationship had blossomed in ways I never could have imagined. He no longer just called to check on me out of guilt or duty. He called because he genuinely wanted to know how I was doing, how I felt. We shared laughter over coffee on the porch, talked about everything and nothing, and every moment felt like a gift. It was clear that he had learned from the past. He understood now that family wasn't just about financial support, it was about being there for each other, about showing up, about making time for the people who mattered most. One Saturday afternoon, as we sat together in the garden enjoying some tea, David casually mentioned, "I've been thinking about something." I looked up from the flowers I was planting, intrigued. "What's that?" He hesitated for a moment,
his gaze flickering toward the horizon as if contemplating something important.
I've been doing a lot of soul searching lately. You know, ever since everything happened with Victoria, it's made me realize that I've been living my life with a lot of assumptions about success, about money, about what makes life meaningful. And, well, I think I've been wrong. I put down my trowel and gave him my full attention. David, you've done nothing wrong. He shook his head, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. No, I have. I've let my work define me for so long, and I've been so focused on building something big, that I forgot what really matters. What I'm trying to say is that while I was busy chasing success, I missed out on a lot of things. And I'm not just talking about Victoria. I felt a shift in the air, a quiet intensity in his words. What are you saying, David? He smiled softly, then looked me in the eye. I think I've been looking for validation in all the wrong places, and I've come to realize that the most important thing I can do is be here with you. I want to live my life differently. I want to spend more time with you, Mom. I want to make sure I'm not too late in doing all the things that matter before I wake up one day and realize it's too late.
His words were a balm to my soul, soothing a wound I hadn't even known was there. It was the kind of honesty I had always wanted from him, the kind of clarity I'd hoped for. You've always been my priority, David, you know that. I know he said, his voice gentle, but now I understand it in a way I didn't before. You were always my foundation, and I was too caught up in building something else to realize it. And that's what I want to change.
I reached out, squeezing his hand. I'm proud of you, David. More than you'll ever know. For the first time in years, we sat in comfortable silence. The kind of silence that felt warm and healing. It wasn't just about the house, the money, or the past. It was about what was to come. It was about reclaiming the time we had, about making up for lost moments and finding joy in the present. As we enjoyed the afternoon, I realized that I had learned something just as important. I had learned to forgive not just David for his mistakes, but myself for the ways I had allowed myself to be hurt. I had learned that life is not about perfection. It's about the choices we make and the people we choose to surround ourselves with.
That evening after dinner, as the sun dipped below the horizon, David and I sat by the water looking out over the lake. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and the air was cool and fresh.
He turned to me, his voice soft. You know, Mom, I was thinking that maybe we should finally take that trip we always talked about. Just the two of us. We've never really done anything like that before, and I think it's time. My heart warmed at the thought. I'd always wanted to travel with David, but life had gotten in the way. But now, with everything that had happened, it felt like the perfect time to start new traditions, to make new memories that would last a lifetime. I'd love that, I said, my voice steady with emotion. I'd really love that. David smiled, and I saw the glimmer of hope in his eyes. The same hope I had seen when he was just a little boy. Let's make it happen then. In that moment, I knew that my life had changed in ways I could never have anticipated. I had been through so much, faced so many trials, but now I was stronger, wiser, and more certain of what I wanted out of life. I was ready to embrace the future with all its uncertainties and joys. And I had no doubt that the journey ahead with my son by my side would be one worth taking. 1 year had passed since that fateful Thanksgiving dinner, and I found myself sitting in the same spot on the porch, sipping my morning tea, staring out at the peaceful lake. It felt surreal to be here in this beautiful house surrounded by the peace I had longed for. The lake, the birds, the soft rustling of the trees. It was everything I had imagined and more. But what was truly different was that I no longer saw it as the house stolen from me as a symbol of deceit. It had become my home. A place where I could finally breathe easy, a place where I could start fresh. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light across the water, and I felt a sense of contentment settle over me. A year ago, this would have been unimaginable. A year ago, I was living in constant fear, wondering how I would make it through another day, watching the days go by in a blur of work and struggle. But now I could look ahead, knowing I was finally free. David had really made up for lost time. He wasn't just the successful businessman anymore. He was the son I had always hoped for, one who wasn't too busy to spend time with his family. He called me nearly every day now, sometimes just to chat, sometimes to tell me about his latest business deal or new plans. But the best part was that he had genuinely become a part of my life again. After everything that had happened with Victoria, I understood that the betrayal, though painful, had led to this, an unbreakable bond with my son. And not just that, but a renewed understanding of the importance of family trust and love. David had been so determined to make up for the past, and his genuine efforts filled me with gratitude. We had become a team working together to rebuild everything. David had gone above and beyond, not just legally, but emotionally supporting me in every way possible. We had even started planning our long-awaited trip together. There was still so much of the world left to see, so much to experience, and I could finally look forward to those adventures without the weight of financial worry dragging me down. But as much as I appreciated David's efforts, I also knew I needed to learn to stand on my own. After everything that had happened with Victoria, I had learned a lot about myself. I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for, and it was time I started to believe in that strength. The lake house, the money, the recovery, it wasn't just about security or comfort. It was about reclaiming my autonomy, my life. The community had embraced me in ways I never expected. When I first moved into the lake house, there had been whispers, some sympathetic, others critical. But over time, as the truth came to light and the dust settled, people began to see the woman who had been through so much and come out the other side. I was no longer just David's mother, or the woman whose daughter-in-law had stolen everything. I was Margaret, a woman who had survived, a woman who had rebuilt her life, a woman who was moving forward no matter what. The calls, the letters, the little notes of encouragement from neighbors, they were all small reminders of how much I had gained. The community may have been shocked by the scandal, but they had also seen the strength it took for me to pick up the pieces of my shattered life and start again. David's visit that morning was a regular one, as it had become part of our routine. He brought over breakfast, fresh fruit, croissants, and the cinnamon rolls I loved from the bakery in town, and we spent the morning chatting about everything and nothing. The light-hearted conversations, the easy laughter, it was exactly the kind of time I had missed with him for so long. There were no more secrets between us, no more lies. "Mom, I was thinking," David said as he poured coffee into 2 mugs. "Now that everything is settled and you're finally living here at the lake house, I'd like to take you on that trip we talked about. You've always wanted to visit Paris, haven't you?" My heart swelled at his words. Paris. The idea of traveling to such a beautiful, romantic city had always seemed like a dream. But now, with David by my side, it felt real. Paris? I asked almost incredulously. "Really?" "Yes, really," David said with a grin. "You've waited long enough. I want us to have this time, Mom, to just enjoy each other's company, to see the world." I smiled, overwhelmed with emotion. "That sounds perfect," I said softly, "but only if we promise not to rush. We'll take it slow, soak in everything." "Slow is the only way I'd want it," he replied, his voice filled with sincerity. It was funny how life had a way of surprising you. A year ago, I never would have imagined sitting here with my son planning a trip to Paris, reflecting on how far we had come. A year ago, I had been struggling to survive, holding on to hope while the world around me seemed to fall apart. Now I had everything I needed: the love of my son, a home by the lake, and the freedom to enjoy my life without constant worry. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, feeling the warmth of the sun as it bathed the porch in its gentle light. It was a new chapter, one I was ready to embrace. The journey had been long and at times unbearably painful, but it had led me to this moment, a moment of peace, of clarity, and of a future that was finally mine. I thought about Victoria for a moment, her lies, her manipulation, the years she had stolen. But instead of bitterness, I felt something else. A quiet understanding that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the most difficult experiences. And I was no longer angry. I was free. I looked at David, who was still smiling as he talked about our upcoming trip. "I can't wait," I said, my voice full of anticipation. "Let's make this trip unforgettable." And just like that, I knew that the best was yet to come. The future was wide open, and I was ready to step into it with my son by my side.